Hi, everyone. Thanks so much for inviting me to be here. I picked out a reading for you, and I also have some questions which I'm going to try to answer in the course of doing the reading. And if you have any questions after the event, you can send them to me. Scotty will get them to me, and I'll be happy to answer them. Before I start, I should mention that this book was written a long time ago, meaning now that I've written probably 65 books, I think this was within the first 10, maybe 12. And when I went back to look, it was kind of an adventure for me to revisit what I'd written such a long time ago, because I don't often reread the books that I've written. I used to at the very beginning. I would read them frequently because there were only 2 or 3 of them. And I would often run out of other books to read, and I would pull out something that I had written, which was part of the reason I started to write in the first place, which was so that I could have something to read that represented the kinds of stories I wanted to read, the people I wanted to read about, the kind of romances that I imagined. So this one I have not reread in probably almost 15 years. So when I got ready to look for a reading, I started reading a lot of it a lot slower and revisiting things, and that was very exciting. So thank you very much for choosing this. I'm really kind of honored that you picked one of my older works, and I hope that you've enjoyed reading it. The other thing you should know about this book is that it's an unusual one for me. It's a standalone, which is not unusual. I've written probably 20% of my works, 25% are standalone romances, and I've written a lot of series, but not at the beginning. At the beginning, I wrote mostly individual books, and I believed at the time that you couldn't write a sequel to a romance, because a romance basically is a story of individuals, often 2 people, not always, but individuals who meet, fall in love, and whose lives are changed by the interactions of their romance. The fact that their falling in love changes them and changes their life and changes their future. And once you get to the end, the romance is completed and the story is essentially over. That doesn't mean that their life together is over, but it does mean that the romance, especially the romance fiction, is over. But I've discovered that the worlds that these characters inhabit persist. They persist in the mind of the reader and hopefully in the hearts of the reader. And they definitely persist in my mind, so that when I go back to write another work in a series, it's not difficult. People say, well, how can you keep them all straight? And it's like, well, you can keep your friends straight, right? I mean, you may have a dozen people that are central in your life, and you know who they are and how they talk and how they think and what they feel. And the same is true for characters. If you've created a character who is, in fact, a 3-dimensional, full-bodied, living character on that page, you'll recognize them when you go back, the way they talk, the way they think, how they feel about their lovers. So revisiting works for me in a series is pretty natural. When I wrote this book, at the time, I had planned to tell the full stories of both Candace and Bren in later books. It was going to be the first of a trilogy. I was very interested in writing romance trilogies, in part because some of the best romance authors do that pretty routinely. Nora Roberts, for example, who is without question the premier romance author in the world, does it all the time. And I really enjoy it. And I really like them. And I thought, well, this is something I can try. And I was pretty experimental early on when I was writing. I wasn't writing a lot of series, so I had the opportunity to just write whatever I felt like writing. And I thought, well, I'll give this a try. And as so often happens, when you finish a book and then you write another book and then you get another idea and you write another book, sometimes you don't circle back to the ideas that you had previously. And what happened for me is that I began acquiring a fairly substantial backlist. And this is an answer to a question, by the way, like, why didn't you write the rest of the 2 stories? And the reason is that I now have a lot of series going and they're popular. And readers ask for more in those series, and I can only write so much every year. And I have to think about what is going to be most popular for most readers, or what does appear to be popular. And because of that, I literally do not have the time to sometimes write after stories, or in this case, another book related to these characters. Um, and that's kind of what happened. Basically, time just got away from me, and I had other books to write, and then other books to write, and other books to write. And now there's been such a long time since I actually wrote that book that I could go back and reacquaint myself with these characters and possibly write one of their stories. And I won't say never, because I've done a lot of things I said I wasn't going to do. And I've written a lot of follow-up stories that I said I wasn't going to write. So I won't say never, but it's not on the schedule at this point in time. So that's kind of an answer to one of the questions that I had given to me. The another one is, which of the three characters did you enjoy writing the most? And that's a tough one, because I really like all these characters, and I hope that they're distinct in your mind. I suppose the main character is always should be your most favorite character. And that would mean, is it Liz or is it Riley? And I often have a hard time choosing between the two main characters. I would say that in this book, the one who was the most fun was Bren, because I could be very experimental with her. And I really like writing writers within a novel. And I've done it a couple of times. I did it in Love's Masquerade. It was the entire premise of that work. And I like showing the dichotomy between the real life individual and the people who know them and their author persona, and what happens when they sit down to write. So I wouldn't say that Bren's experiences are my experiences, but perhaps as an author, they might be. The rest of it, I will leave up to you to decide or think about. I've covered whichever consider a sequel and which ones are my favorite characters. So what I'm sitting in the office, by the way, and it's about 10 minutes to 5 on a Sunday afternoon. So I'm got some sun coming in, but hopefully it's not going to distract you very much. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to do a reading, and I spent quite a long time picking a reading, because usually I will pick a reading that symbolizes some part of the romance arc, the first meet, the first kiss, perhaps a crisis moment. And in this book, there's so many atypical things. And I decided that what really characterizes this book and makes it different and makes it unique, and hopefully, I hope, what makes it enjoyable for you, is that the interaction between the three best friends, which is something that I don't often do. I don't write a lot of friends sitting around talking, and I don't write a lot of girlfriends. It's kind of like not my thing, but I did in this book, and I really enjoy it. So I picked a reading with the three of them, which basically for me shows each of the characters sort of in their essentialness. Like, who are they? Not only individually, but who are they to each other? So that's why I picked this reading. So I'm going to be reading three different characters. And hopefully they were well enough presented so you'll know who they are. And then at the end, I think there are a couple of other little questions that I will try to answer, but I hope you enjoy the reading, and I certainly hope you enjoyed the book. And it's a great honor for me that you chose one of my books, and I hope that it's been an enjoyable and fun experience for you. So here they are. Candace, wearing a tight pink t-shirt, baggy jeans, and strapped sandals, flopped onto the nearly threadbare sofa in front of the open windows in Bren's West Philadelphia Victorian, and propped her feet up on the steamer trunk that stood in for a coffee table. She'd arrived with her blonde curls still damp from the shower half an hour after Bren had called. God, Candace sighed, balancing a glass of wine on her stomach. Sometimes I wish I still lived here. I think I might have had some of the best sex of my life on this sofa. Thank you for that image, Bren said, curling up with a cup of coffee and an equally worn armchair across from the sofa. It wasn't yet noon and a bit early for her and wine. She had changed out of her holey sweats into a decent pair before Liz had arrived, but hadn't bothered with shoes. Well, it's no secret, Candace scoffed. You walked in on me in the throes enough times. I kept my eyes closed. Bren grinned mischievously. Most of the time. Sometimes, Bren agreed with Candace about turning back the clock. The three of them had rented the house for 4 years until Liz and Candace could afford to move into their own places. Bren had purchased the house then and renovated it to suit her needs. She'd kept some of the old furniture for her office, a tall ceilinged room with walnut floors and deep bay windows, a fireplace on one wall, and a view of the brick-walled rear garden. She made enough money from her book royalties that she could have refurnished the entire house, but she didn't want to. The office, where she slipped into another world to write and dream, was her sanctuary and her favorite room in the whole house. Sometimes she'd look up from her computer, expecting to see Candace wrapped up in the latest flame on the sofa, and Liz bent over a law book, a glass of red wine in one hand. Seeing the empty room always hurt a little until she remembered they would always be there. Some memories never go away. Carrying a glass of iced tea, Liz sat down next to Candace and nudged her with her knee. And you still hog the couch. Move over. Candace shrugged and shifted an inch and patted Liz's thigh. So, let's hear it. I can't imagine how you managed to get yourself into trouble since we just saw you, she glanced at her Piaget, 13 hours ago. I won't ask you what you've been doing the last 13 hours, Liz grumbled. I'll be happy to tell you, in detail, but you first. You don't have to tell us, Bren cut in. You've got a love bite on your neck. I don't. God damn it, where? I told her not to. Candace broke off, her eyes narrowing as she lasered in on Bren. That is not funny, Brenda Louise. Sorry, Bren glanced apologetically at Liz. So, what happened? Candace had made Liz promise on the phone not to say anything until she arrived, and the wait hadn't helped. Liz still hadn't cleared up her confusion. I don't even know where to start. Okay, Candace said brightly. Let's start with rough and rowdy Riley. Would that be a good guess? She isn't. Liz thought of how Riley always seemed to know exactly what she needed without her even asking, without her even knowing sometimes. She's tender and thoughtful. At Candace's raised eyebrows, Liz said, I mean it. She's a lot more gentle than she looks. When Candace feigned a yawn, Bren kicked the bottom of her foot. Cut it out. Okay, sorry, Candace said, looking not the least bit chagrined. But really, with the way she came on last night, all sweaty and aggressive and competitive. She is, Liz said, but that's not all she is. She sipped her tea and added quietly, this morning she kissed me. Wow, Bren said, genuinely surprised. Really, Candace said coolly. And just how did that come about? Canned, Bren said with a bit of heat in her voice. Do you think you can be quiet long enough for Liz to tell us? Candace shot her a look, but obediently pressed her lips together. After breakfast, You spent the night with her? Candace shot upright, interrupting Liz yet again. No, Liz said patiently. I drove her home last night because she had too much to drink. When I offered to bring her back to her car this morning, she wanted to take me out to breakfast. Are you with me so far? Candace made a hurry-up motion with her hand. Well, that's it, really. I drove her to her car and she kissed me. Liz shrugged. I guess it really isn't that big of a deal. Except for the fact that you hardly know her, Bren pointed out reasonably. And she's not your type, Candace added quickly. And you just broke up with Julia, the bitch, Bren chimed in. And you're pregnant, Candace said darkly. Liz sighed. Okay, reasonable points. She pulled her legs up onto the old nappy sofa and curled her arms around them. Resting her cheek against her knees, she wished she were back in law school, still living here, when everything had seemed so critical, but in retrospect had been far simpler than she'd ever realized. Candace had been fresh-faced and so filled with life and spirit that even when she was breaking hearts, including her own, Liz couldn't help but love her. Bren had always been there, sturdy and solid and strong. She was the rock, despite being the smallest of all of them in size. And Liz had known just what she wanted in life, a career, a partner, a family. It had never occurred to her that the things she wanted would be at odds. Was it a good kiss? Candace asked grudgingly. Terrific, Liz muttered. Do you like her? Bren asked. Yes. This was the one thing Liz was certain of. She knew there were things about Riley she didn't know, almost certainly important things. Things about Annie, for sure. Whenever Riley spoke of her, something dark, something more than the pain of loss surfaced in her eyes. But even though Liz knew there were secrets, she trusted her. Let's look at this logically, Bren suggested. Have you ever considered that kind of approach might be the reason you never accept a date? Candace said. There's nothing logical about lust, Candace went on. You see, you want, ergo, you screw. Liz laughed wryly, and Bren smiled. That's your formula, Bren said. Some of us actually think about things like who and why and what happens the next day. Candace tilted her head contemplatively. That sounds a lot like pouring cold water on flames to control a fire. If you're not careful, all you end up with is ashes. Maybe. Bren couldn't disagree too strongly because she had a feeling under the right circumstances she just might take Candace's route. If she'd had the opportunity to take the blonde's place in the bathroom a few nights before, if she could have been the nameless woman dictating her needs, controlling the events, she would have done it. You know, Liz said wearily, I wish I could be more like you, Cand. I actually even thought about you this morning when I was kissing Riley, and what I really wanted to do was tear her clothes off, or have her tear off mine. I knew you would do it and love it, and I wish I could too. You wanted to tear her clothes off? Candace sounded stunned. Liz nodded. For a few seconds, yeah, I did. God, she's got a beautiful mouth. Uh-oh, Bren murmured. What? Liz said, turning to Bren. I never heard you say anything like that about Julia. Sure I did. When we first met, I said she was hot and sexy, and no, you didn't, Bren and Candace said simultaneously. Well, I'm sure I meant to. Candace ran the tip of her open-toed sandal up and down Liz's calf. You did used to say that I had a great tongue. Liz almost said that every woman in Philadelphia could probably testify to Candace's skills, but held back because she knew what very few others ever realized. Underneath Candace's seductive bravado, some part of that insecure farm girl still remained, and Liz would never hurt her. In the positive column, Bren interjected, what do we have beside the fact that she's got a beautiful mouth? Silently, she contemplated the phrase and found it perfect. She couldn't wait to find a place for it in her next chapter. She looks really good when she sweats, Candace supplied helpfully. She's smart and listens, and Liz laughed. She turns me on. Debit column? Bren asked. Liz sighed. I just came out of a long, complicated, unsatisfying relationship with Julia, and that's not even really over. And of course, she placed her hand on her abdomen and smiled crookedly. There's the little matter of Junior or Junior S. So what do we have? Bren said thoughtfully. You're attracted to her, but there are complications. She glanced at Liz's hand where it still lay on Liz's belly. That pretty much changes everything, doesn't it? It certainly does, Liz admitted. What are you going to do? Bren asked. The only thing I know for sure is that I'm going to apologize and explain to her why I cut and ran in the middle of a kiss I let go too far. You don't have to see her again, you know, Candace said. Yes, I do. She kissed me first, but I kissed her back. That's reason enough to explain. Liz felt better for having made the decision. There's a game tomorrow. I'll talk to her afterwards. Parker's probably playing, Candace. Probably, Candace said casually, but I don't plan on seeing her again. We had our night of ecstasy. I'll go to keep you company, though. Me too, Bren said, wondering if Jay, as she now routinely thought of the dark-haired stranger, would be there. Liz took Candace's hand and stretched the other out to Bren, who took it. Thanks, she said. I'm going to need you two tomorrow. Okay, so that's the reading of The Three Friends. And as I read it, I'm glad I chose it. I think that they are at the heart of this story, the friendship. In a romance novel, the romance is always key. It's always what drives the story. It's why readers read the book to see the two characters, or sometimes more than two characters, discover each other, discover things about themselves, and end with a satisfying, committed, hopefully long-term relationship. But I think in this book in particular, the romance is balanced by the relationship between these three women. And now that I look at it again, I'm really glad that I wrote it, and I'm glad that you reminded me to read it. I have no idea if anyone's pseudonym might have been perhaps stimulated by this book. I can tell you that there was no one I knew by that name at the time. So I got there first. Other than that, I hope that you enjoyed this, and I hope you enjoyed the reading. And Rachel, thank you so much for putting this together, and hopefully you can edit out any parts that I screwed up. Any questions afterwards, please send them on, and I will be more than happy to answer them. Happy reading in the future, and thank you all for your support. We would not be writing these books. We would not be here if it weren't for you. So, heartfelt thanks. Thank you.